Assalamu alaikum and welcome everybody to Finding a Voice in World Literature. We have with us Shazaf, Fatima and Taha Kehar, both brilliant novelists and also writing on other issues besides fiction. So they're going to both have their book launches for their latest novels tomorrow. So I'm not going to focus too much on the novels because you'll have a chance to hear more about it in detail tomorrow. But I think we're going to talk about this strange and fascinating beast called Anglophone literature and see how you feel you're playing well, you definitely are playing a role in it.
We try.
You do try, and you try very well. So I thought I'd just do a brief introduction about Anglophone literature and how it fits in with world literature. This term, world literature, was actually first conceptualized and voiced by Goethe, the great German writer, as far back as 1827. And he thought that world literature was a great way for different nations to understand each other. So his vision for world literature was a very benign one. In 1835, coming to our subcontinent, we had the India Education Act with Bentinck and Macaulay, where they introduced English, and I think it was meant to develop a cadre of elite English speakers in the subcontinent who would be a good bridge between them and the rest of the uncivilized masses. So now we fast forward about 100 years and we come to the 20th century, where a lot of anti-colonial movements had begun and many nations had started to become autonomous. The nations that were colonies of the United Kingdom, or Great Britain as it was then, they are generally known now as, well, they became the Commonwealth. They moved into the Commonwealth, and the British critics would call all the writers who came from these ex-colonized countries who were writing in English Commonwealth writers. And now when we come to the term Anglophone literature has changed the paradigm from a nation-based paradigm to a language-based paradigm. So it's a much wider one, and I think it's also trying to shed some of the hierarchies and hegemonies that are associated with post-colonial structures, post-colonial center and periphery relations. So with that, I think we'll launch right in. I'm so sorry that I'm going to do a kind of a tennis situation here. So I'd like to ask both of you, Shazaf, let me start with you and ask you how you see yourself as an Anglophone writer, or even if you do see yourself as an Anglophone writer.
Thank you, Nusrat, for actually making that context so clear. I didn't know that, so that was very educational for me. Do I see myself as an Anglophone writer? Well, I write in English, so obviously I must be an Anglophone writer. But I think it's a loaded and a layered term, because to write in English presupposes a lot of things. It means that, and there's certain things that, that's constantly thrown at people who write in English, that you are A, elitist, B, that you are writing for the West, C, that you're not really painting a picture of Pakistan in your writing because you write in English. And I'm not going to talk about my books, I promise, but my first book was about arranged marriages in Pakistan. My second book was about jinn, because my A-level students didn't know about our folklore, so they knew more about Harry Potter, and they didn't know about jinn and jinneries and all of that. And this one is about being a divorced woman in Pakistan. So here I am seen as an Anglophone writer who is disconnected, but I live in London, and over there I am seen as too Pakistani, and I don't write about issues that are broad enough. So, am I an Anglophone writer? I don't know. I am Anglophone for some people and not Anglophone enough. And I think that there aren't so many neat categories. I think there is a space for people, for Pakistani writers to write about Pakistan in the English language. And I think it's more exciting because now we have our own publishing scene that is germinating. It's there. And I think that when I started writing How It Happened, which was published about 15 years ago, we all looked to India or the UK or the USA to publish our books. And now we have Liberty Books, we have Zuka Books, we have Little Book Company. We have so many little publishing houses that are coming up. So I think this angst and this anxiety, ke, are you really a Pakistani writer if you write in English? I think it's time. It'll take time, but now I think that is slowly fading away. But the question whether I'm Anglophone, I don't know.
I think yes. I think I would class you as an Anglophone writer because it is a very broad and quite an equitable category. So Taha, let me come to you on that.
It's fascinating. I agree that it's a very broad term, and it's much better than saying we're post-colonial writers, because you mentioned earlier that you're assuming as a post-colonial writer that you're writing back to someone, whether it's empire or anybody else.
Yes.
I do agree it's a broad category. I do feel that it's an academic label. Sometimes it's easier to teach a course on Anglophone literature when you can categorize writers accordingly. But when it comes to the English language, I have a very unsettling relationship with it. I'm speaking in English at the moment.
We like discussing unsettled relationships here.
So I'm speaking in English at the moment. I use it for practicality, but I'm aware of the fact that it's not a very innocent language.
Yeah. No.
It is a colonial tool. It has been. And because...
I disagree with you, but go ahead.
It's okay. We can disagree with each other.
I
It's
love
fine.
disagreements even more than unsettled relationships.
Just because I am a so-called Anglophone writer, again, I don't want to label myself. I'm not an Anglophile. That's the one thing that I don't want to be labeled as, because
Yes. Okay.
the English language does play tricks on you as a writer.
Okay.
I feel whenever I've been writing a scene, when I'm working with dialogue, I'll put it down on paper, and it just doesn't translate well for some reason. Maybe I'm not being able to capture the cultural context or the milieu. That's just my assumption. I know you wouldn't agree with me on this.
No.
You're very...
But that's okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
You're shattered when you hear this.
No.
But I do.
You write in Urdu as well,
No, I
Taha,
don't.
just to ask. So
No, I don't.
actually that's your primary writing language. And you're
Eventually-
feeling conflicted in your primary writing
in my
language.
primary, but because I also have to reckon with the other languages around me. Whether it's, because I speak two other languages. I speak Urdu, then there's Sindhi, then there are languages that are in the air. You hear it in the marketplace. You just have to, how do you capture all of that? And then to be accused, because you spoke about elitism earlier, when we're accused of writing about elite realities, I often wonder, how do we capture those elite realities or non-elite realities through the English language?
You actually have written about elites in Nazia.
I have.
Right?
You read it?
Yes, I have, of course.
wow.
Why do you sound so surprised? I've read it too.
I'm very surprised.
And
I've read yours,
a
but-
woman on a suitcase. You see, Shazaf has come, looked at a very middle-class family, which doesn't have the same liberties that the family you're looking at in Nazia has.
That's very true, actually.
So I think you can cover many different grounds.
It is interesting, actually. We are writing
and
about
since
very
you're talking tomorrow, I think that'll be an excellent point of discussion, because you've captured two very different milieu of Karachi society, I think.
Yes.
Yeah? So,
Sorry, no, sir, it's hard for us to stay serious because we make fun of each other. So आप ज़्यादा stress मत होइएगा.
नहीं,
ठीक
पर
है.
मेरा मजाक मत उड़ाइए.
नहीं, आपका बिल्कुल नहीं. आप बहुत आपका हम इज्जत करेंगे. Yes.
इतनी भी बूढ़ी नहीं हो, इतनी इज्जत की भी ज़रूरत नहीं है. अच्छा. So, but writers writing back, you would be in the company of writers like Chinua Achebe.
Basically,
Salman Rushdie. Naipaul was again, some people considered him to be a collaborator, but I think that's an unfair.
I think a little bit, to some extent.
Yeah, generation gap.
That's another conversation altogether.
Okay.
But then,
Right. And Shazaf brought up the issue of printing houses. Now, how interesting, and we have the little book company founder here, Maniza Naqvi, herself a writer. Most welcome, Maniza. How well do you think publishing houses, local versus international publishing houses, how well do you think your work is disseminated to the world?
You go first.
You take
You
it.
have a lot of thoughts on this, it seems.
Okay, so I think it's so I will say again, we are in an era of hope because we are not looking to one country. There are so many issues. However, I will say this. When How It Happened was published, it was more readily available in India than it was in Pakistan. Okay? And this is a constant problem. Now I can see, because we have our own printing press, which is A Woman on a Suitcase was published by Liberty Books, it is more easily available. And it is in their interest to be available. And I was mentioning Little Book Company, I was mentioning Zuka Books. These are people who are taking up that vacuum, that sense of that opportunity that was presented when that book trade ban between India and Pakistan happened. And I think that I will say something controversial, but there are not too many people in the room, so I will be okay. I think that we as Pakistanis still have trouble taking ownership and taking pride in what we have produced. Yesterday in Bapsi Sidhwa, the talk about Bapsi Sidhwa, she had written The Crow Eaters. I mean, it was said, The Crow Eaters, Pakistan, The Bride. And actually nobody paid attention to it until it got attention to the West. And then suddenly we sat up and we said, And I feel that that is still happening. And you make a lot of mistake. We make a lot of sort of incorrect assessments that, not too many people would be reading your books. Not too many people, what's the point of writing? And that's a completely different session altogether, right? But I feel that there is an organic process that has finally started in this country. And I'm incredibly excited by it.
Thank you, Shazaf. Yes, I agree with you that it's the proliferation of publishing houses, local publishing houses, is a very significant sign of something happening organically. Taha, can I come to you on that?
It is an exciting time to be a writer in Pakistan at the moment, because I remember a time not too long ago with my previous novel, Liberty Books ordered maybe 50 copies.
Yes.
And my previous novel, typically Tanya, was published in India.
Yeah.
So those 50 copies, I mean, they fly off the shelves. That's just what it is.
And sorry, for context, what happens is that you get 50 copies and then you wait a month for the next 50 copies. Then you made. And so what happens is that if you as a writer are generating demand and there's like 200 or 300 books that people want to buy, but there's only 50 copies.
People have to wait.
People wait and then they lose interest.
They lose interest.
This is what used to happen.
So at the moment with Liberty Books and Reverie Publishers and Little Book Company, less so, because they don't do Pakistani editions, they do original books, which is actually more interesting to me.
And they've also gone into regional languages.
That's the best part.
Yeah,
you do awards as well, Sindhi. That's
that
excellent.
is what's needed. Yes.
So Liberty Books has started this practice of publishing local editions of our books. So we have more demand, and I suppose we also have more supply.
And affordability.
And
I think that's
affordability.
very important.
But
for
one of the things I
many,
want to
a wider
focus on when
demographic.
it comes to publishing here is, I think there has to be a bit of an overhaul somewhere. We're not really putting in the kind of editorial input to original books. I do feel that books need to be edited and books need to be marketed a certain way. We're still learning how to market books. That's just one of the things I'm struggling to understand myself. How do I put myself out there? Because back in the day, I don't remember doing a lot of marketing. I'm saying back in the day like I'm 100, but I'm actually not. Just a few years ago.
You're just 80.
We're just 80. So I remember publicizing, doing an event, a book launch, a book signing. Does that really get you very far? Do you do sessions online? What do you do? Are you supposed to constantly be promoting yourself? So there are some questions that we need to answer, but I suppose these are questions that plague the entire publishing industry. It's not just Pakistani publishing as such.
No, but that's a very important point you've
Exactly.
raised, that a publishing house by itself, without good editing that it can offer its writers, is not going to attain the quality that you need to
And
compete
especially
internationally.
with first-time authors, you need to give them.
Right.
more
So you
something,
need
and
very experienced
you need a
editors
crutch
as
for
well
that, yeah.
as having the
And I feel
facility.
that is the one thing that I critique local publishing houses for, that they don't have that kind of editorial input, or they have it, but it's expensive.
Yeah,
because
that's really important.
if anyone
I think.
comes
Good
to me
feedback.
if anyone comes to me to have their manuscript edited, I'm going to charge them money.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
if you charge them a lot of money, naturally the cost of the book goes up. So
Acha, I do it out of the goodness of my heart.
really,
It's nice to know that's still alive.
No,
how much do you earn per book? That's the question I want to ask
Okay,
you.
more important questions than Anglophone literature after this session. So let me ask you. I would like to ask you about critique, which is not being critical, but getting critique related. But before I ask you about critical authority, can I ask you in turns to tell me what kind of a sociological landscape you are looking to create in your writing, in your fiction writing? Shazaf?
Acha.
आपको पहले?
So, what kind of sociological landscape? So, I write what I know, okay? And so, my, blessing and my curse is I come from a very respectable middle class family in Karachi. So, I don't have, I lived in Karachi, but I didn't really go around a lot of Karachi because I was basically at home. So I observed the politics of, the women, the politics of getting married, the politics of procuring rishtas, rejecting rishtas, and now about the politics of divorce. So the sociological landscape for me is very much the people around me. And also, and we were having a discussion with some friends where we were talking about middle class values, and I don't think middle class for me has to do with income. It has to do with a class of people who were not powerful and could do whatever they want, nor very poor, so they had to grovel. So they developed a value system, a code of manners, a code of ethics with which how to navigate the world. And most of that code was quite detrimental to women. So I like to stay in that space.
Okay. So we'll stay on this a little bit. Let me ask Taha about the sociological landscape in your fiction writing.
From the outset, I want to say that I'm neither a sociologist or a cultural ambassador.
No,
so I try
not-
not to
yeah.
weave too much sociology or any history into it. But I do look at the domestic sphere as well, because even though I did venture into various workspaces, I do feel that the domestic sphere can tell you so much more about society.
Yeah.
And oftentimes politics and whatever's going on in society, whether it's the systems of patriarchy, the way we oppress various groups, it happens in the household as well.
Yeah.
So for me, the domestic space is very loaded, and it's a very sacred space, and I do want to cover that in subsequent works as well. So
Yeah. But I think it's very interesting that your two latest novels, they actually create a very interesting discourse between each other. So tomorrow will be a very engaging
Interesting,
session
thank you.
also. But staying with your fiction writing, I mean, in this age of the anti-hero, who would you consider to be a heroic fictional character? Do you have this idea, like, is heroism
Interesting.
even important to your writing?
I don't think so.
No?
I gravitate towards the anti-hero.
The anti-hero?
I feel more comfortable with that because
Okay.
I just feel like when I'm trying to read something, the point of reading is to explore a world that we wouldn't experience on our own. Realistically, we can't possibly go through a whole gamut of experiences in life. So just to humanize yourself, just to open your eyes to certain possibilities, the way other people live. And there are people out there who make some problematic choices. I'm not going to say we need to glorify those choices, but maybe understanding where they come from is very important, at least for me.
Yeah, I think that is the beauty of literature, that we are more than what we are without literature by reading.
By reading.
And then we access so many other worlds and micro worlds through literature. Shazaf, on heroism?
So I don't think, I think, I think that heroism lies in the everyday acts of getting out of bed and choosing joy and choosing perseverance over a sense of discouragement and despair. And I think specifically young women in Pakistan, young women in Karachi, in the big cities, who have all these dreams but who are so restricted, when they pursue pleasure, when they pursue freedom, when they, and we're not even like breaking a lot of rules here, but even, a little thing, such as deciding to say no to someone on the day of your nikah because you're not feeling safe, that is violently like rebellious. It's seen as violently rebellious, but it is an act of heroism, but it's so small.
Right.
So yeah, I think women are more heroic.
A
I feel like.
stereotypical definition of the hero needs to change. That's what
Yes.
it is. We just need to see
Yeah.
each and every one of us as heroes. But obviously, I gravitate towards the anti-hero because they seem more interesting. Heroes get boring after a while.
But I think what we are looking at, and especially in your novel, subversion is a very heavy price a woman has to pay.
Yes.
And she needs to subvert in order to realize herself.
Yes.
So, and I think subversion is something that is also culturally determined. So I think coming back to Anglophone literature, I think we would learn about different types of subversion if we were going to read Anglophone literature coming from different parts of the world, like Ketsia from South Africa, or Gunnar Serka from Sri Lanka.
Yes.
So,
I mean, I also think, by the way, I had a very deep thought and I've promptly forgotten it. So please go ahead. When I remember it, I will say it. Yes.
okay.
Yes. I've completely
Does
forgotten
it have to do with subversion?
It
and
has to
cultural
do with
context?
subversion and cultural context. I've completely.
All
It was
right,
a
no
very
problem,
good
no
thought.
problem. We will
I
move
promise
on.
it was a very good thought.
We will move on. Yeah, I do that all the time.
Yes.
So how do you think that your work, even though you're talking of a very local niche, and your book I know is in spread across 2 countries.
Yes.
So how does your work fit into global categories, do you feel, or is that not important, even though you're describing a local niche? And Taha, in your book, you're describing a very local niche, down to Sunset Boulevard. You know, you
Yes.
can almost trace the address from your writing.
Find the address,
So,
everyone.
Yeah, almost, yeah. So, Shazaf, would you like to go first on how you can talk about local niches and look at
Yes.
global categories in your work?
So I for some of you who've just come, I was talking about, there's this very interesting space I'm in where over here I'm not considered Pakistani enough, but over there I'm considered too Pakistani. But one of the things I have done is a lot of people in the UK, not a lot, but enough people in the UK have read my book and given me feedback on it, where there is an element of surprise, because I think that Taha and I, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and so we are freed by the expectation sometimes of writing about the usual things such as terrorism or politics or honor killing and things like that. We are freed from those expectations because other people did it so well before us, right? And I feel like there is a sense of surprise that, you people, but you all have the same lives, preoccupations as the rest of us, but in similar ways, but your language is different. One of the things I also, it's a revelation to me. I say to people, read my 3rd book, don't read my 1st book, because my English is very Pakistani in that. It's a lot of like enough shinough and don't shon't and things like that. So I thought that would throw them. But actually they are much more interested in that, because they're like, it's a familiar language and at the same time unfamiliar. And they're like, is that how people talk? And yeah, that's how my mom talks, you know? So the enough, enough and all of that. And I think that sitting here, we think that, we dumb down our audience in the West, and the people in the West dumb down us writers as writing about the same thing over and over again. And a lot of people feel that we ought to be explaining ourselves to them. And I'm interested in exploring in this whenever when you think you find a space in this, is to turn the gaze of world English and Anglophone English from the outside looking in to the inside looking in.
I love that, inside looking in.
Yeah.
Yes, and writing to ourselves really.
Yes.
And coming to ourselves as a revelation.
And
through
then
reading fiction.
and not worrying about the reception in the West or the reception in Pakistan. Because what is storytelling except an act of figuring out life in your own head?
But what are some of the some feedback that you have received in the UK, because you live there now?
Yes.
And what are some of the things you've heard, say from maybe an Indian reader or a UK reader,
Yes.
British reader?
So Indian readers respond exactly the same. We are the same people.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, the British readers, they have a sense of curiosity because there aren't too many books they're reading that is not layered in a lot of political narrative from us.
Right.
So, and also with how it happened, also, some of them who, you see, London is a very multicultural space. It's not like America, for example, where societies live separately. So they are familiar with the South Asian humor, with our narratives, with our cultures. So it's almost as if they're approaching it as they don't see the difference that we assume they see.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But would the book shock here as it doesn't shock there?
Nobody talks about the shocking
Nobody
part
talks about the
because
shocking
my mother's
part.
sitting right
Yes,
there.
exactly.
Chapter 17 we are not going to mention.
So but that's a good reason to run
We'll
out and
mention
buy
it
the
later.
book.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's
Taha.
interesting because when I started writing, I began writing about 10 years ago, and I had a publisher at the time who I'm thankfully no longer with. He insisted that I should write about terrorism and
Yeah.
migration because that is what sells,
Yeah.
and that is what other Pakistanis are writing about. And I knew that that wasn't the case because there were so many people who were not writing about those things. Manisa doesn't write about those things, and we've been reading her for years. So it's interesting to see that. But with the growth in genre fiction over the years, where people are writing mystery, they're writing thrillers, fantasy, chick lit, all of a sudden that has humanized us.
Yes.
So we're no longer driven by this obsession to explain ourselves to the world. We're just ordinary people out there.
But there's one caveat. The problem also is like what we are writing is great, okay? But are we... so while we are not obsessed and preoccupied with the Western gaze, we do need our books to get to them.
We need our books to
And
get
so
to them.
who's in the gateway? The gateway is the publishers and the
Because
agents.
eventually it becomes a question of, is it going to appeal to a mass audience?
Yes.
And will people understand? Therefore, when I talk about dialogue and not being able to communicate effectively through that dialogue because I can't capture the cadence of what people are saying, it boils down to the question of publishing.
Yes.
Will people be interested in that? People will say this is very niche. I remember for No Funeral for Nazia, if some of you have bothered to buy the book, there's a glossary at the back, and I was vehemently
I was
against...
just going to come to enough, Shazaf, don't show.
I was vehemently
And you were
against-
against writing a glossary. Please.
Typically Tanya, they told me to write one. I didn't write a glossary. I wrote a glossary of places where Tanya goes in Karachi. So it's almost like a map. But with this book, I was told, you have to write a glossary. And I said, okay, I could do it, but why?
Yeah.
And then my publisher sat me down. She said, look, she was South Asian as well.
Yes.
We come from a very diverse space. There's certain things you will talk about that I will not understand, even though we're from the same South Asian region. So maybe that's also an interesting way of going about with things. But what I realized while I was preparing that glossary is that there were certain terms that we use incorrectly in Urdu. Beta and beti. we use beta generically for women as well.
Yeah.
And I
But
realized
that's not incorrect.
that's not incorrect. But
Yeah.
but I was just interested. It was interesting to see that in the way we're using language as well. So it was a history lesson and a lesson in the way we use language. So for me that was interesting, but I'm still not in favor of any glossaries. I did it because I had to.
I think the glossary would allow you to be published in the West,
That's
in
what
the
it is.
UK.
But I've noticed over the years there were Pakistani books published with glossaries at the back as well, where beta and beti were explained to a Pakistani reader. And
Or italicized.
I have an interesting review on italicizing words. I think we're okay without them, but sometimes, I mean, the sub-editor in me was always taught to italicize an Urdu word or any word because it had to stand out. But I don't know. Would you?
But because italicizing visually separates something from your narrative. So if you've italicized a word, that means it's alien and foreign. And if something of my own writing is alien and foreign in my own book, then I'm sorry.
You're
no.
othering yourself in the process.
Yes,
That's
you're yeah.
You're basically isolating yourself from your cultural heritage.
And actually, जितनी बात हुई है अभी सही बात की है, लेकिन there is a truth that if you want, you see, why do we write? Basically, it is not just an expression. It's not all of that. It's also we would like to make some money. Basically, right? And so if you want to get more money, you get published in the West. Who are the gatekeepers? The publishing houses. And if they say you need to provide a glossary, and I would say they underestimate the intelligence of their own people, right? So they just want to make sure, absolutely sure, that, readers will understand it, because if they don't understand it, they will not buy it.
But it's interesting because, sorry to cut you up, because they overestimate our intelligence, because those books are sent to us without any glossaries.
Yes.
So now we know what a launderette is
Yes.
when we read Hanif Qureshi.
Bilkul.
But they need an explanation.
They need an explanation.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And actually
You
the
use
readers
Toby,
who
yeah.
I am in touch with, they don't need an explanation. So you have, so we are trying to access a reader, but the interface is the publishing house, and you all cause many problems.
I love how you're the only spokesperson for every publishing house here.
Vanessa, if you want to, you're welcome to step in and comment on that as a gateway. Well deserved. But because you are a gateway, as Shazaf has said, so we can.
But she's a good
talk
one.
more.
She's
Yeah,
a good guy.
one.
She's
She's a good guy.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. But even writers like Somerset Maugham, they have used Chinese words, writing in flawless English, because that was the milieu that they were talking about. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, she in the Purple Hibiscus and all, she brings in Nigerian words. I think they were not italicized.
No,
if
they
I
are
remember.
sometimes italicized.
Sometimes
They are
okay.
italicized.
But so I think that is what gives Anglophone writing an authentic flavor, because it's coming from the place that the writer is living in or writing about. So I think it's okay to have a glossary, in my opinion, as a reader, because it gives the reader an option, and a reader who just likes not understanding but just sort of interpreting through the paragraph, they don't have to go to the back.
This is primarily for a Western audience. For a local audience, they'll get frustrated reading 4 pages of
But
a
they
glossary.
don't have to go at the back.
Yeah,
they don't have to look at
that.
the...
You give them the option.
Yeah, they don't
But they
have
will make an effort to criticize you for
Yeah.
it as well.
Yes.
They will say dekho glossary dal di, as if we're idiots. Basically.
Well, they shouldn't. I think that's like excessive criticism, in my opinion. But coming to niche spaces, I wanted to hear why you chose to focus so tightly, basically in one house, really, isn't it?
It is one house, yes.
No Funeral for Nazia.
No Funeral for Nazia.
So,
A little plug-in. No Funeral for Nazia is about a woman who dies, and she tells her sister that I don't want a funeral, I want a party. So there are 6 people gathered at the Sunset Boulevard residence. You can go find it if you want to. I don't know where it is. But I just decided it's the house with the bougainvillea. So
Oh, I know which house it is.
And you're going there. You're going
Those
to
poor
check it
people,
out.
they'll
Yeah.
have all these people coming
Yeah.
over. So I decided to do that because I wanted to see what I could do with the private sphere and how I could link it with what was going on around Karachi at the time. And for me, it's always more interesting to focus on the domestic sphere because there's so many dynamics that play out within that space.
Yeah.
There are two domestics in that house as well, so automatically your class differentials come in, and you're speaking about society. The other thing I wanted to do was I just chanced upon this mystery setting. I didn't realize I was doing it. I realized, wow, this is Agatha Christie. What do
Yeah.
I do with this? And
A whodunit.
basically,
And even a bit of a whodunit with whom. So.
and who done it with whom?
Yeah.
That's I like that. The thing that I find what I wanted to do was, okay, there has to be a body, there has to be a murder, but then I thought that would just be too much. So let me focus a little bit more on another kind of murder, the murder of emotions, the murder of experiences, and that's where Nazia comes in as this person who's suffered through all these emotional crimes that people have committed against her, and
so judged.
so judged.
Yeah.
And yeah, and she's a silence through it all. That's the one thing. And I was actually more interested in a character that was silent
Yeah.
through it all,
Yeah.
just like Rebecca from
Yes.
Daphne du Maurier, which for me was the
Yeah.
inspiration.
And
So-
it's interesting because the physical space is confined to a house, but the psychological space keeps widening with the characters. So that's an interesting dynamic. Would you agree that with our Pakistani Anglophone writing, the urban space is so emphasized at the cost of the rural space? I think some exceptions, Zulfikar
Zulfikar
Ghosh, the murder of Aziz Khan, and Danyal Mohyuddin in Other Rooms, Other Wonders.
I would say it about not just urban spaces, but even generally on a provincial level. There are very few novels that are set in Balochistan or Khyber
Yeah.
Pakhtunkhwa. I think there's Ali
Babsi
Rohila's novel.
Sidwa, though, the bride,
The
she
Bride
comes
was
from a
from that
village up,
space.
in
And just recently, Usman
KPK.
Hanif wrote a novel. It's called The Verdict, and it was interesting because there's some reference to Quetta and living in Quetta, which I thought was intriguing. And we do emphasize the urban narrative more because maybe it sells more than a rural narrative. Because then Awais Khan though writes what was the second novel? No Honor.
No honor.
No Honor. His novel dealt with honor killing, and it was set in rural Punjab as well. So we are trying to break that barrier, but I do feel that the urban narrative is given too much emphasis. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm guilty of it as well, so
Yes.
I can't really say
Shazaf,
anything.
what do you say? Does it attract you? Do you think in the future you might look beyond the city and beyond city dwellers?
No,
No, you wouldn't.
no,
Okay.
I wouldn't, because I'm not that good a writer. Okay.
I beg to differ.
You
but
are a very good writer.
No, no, no,
in
no.
my opinion.
Because okay, so the narratives that I have read that are not about the urban settings, I find very problematic. Because if you have not experienced it and if you have not done enough research, then some of it, rings untrue. Some of it
lapses into stereotypes.
there is a stereotype, and there's also the otherization of people, of your own people.
Of your own people.
And I think I would. You see, I have to live somewhere, and I come before I can write about it. Okay, I can write about Quetta, but I can write about Quetta cantonment, which is not Quetta.
Yeah.
You know, so I can write very well about Quetta cantonment, and I think there is because I have this great novel in my head about the politics of the army wives over there. I will not be allowed to write this, but it is there in my
Do
mind.
write it secretly.
I'll write it secretly, and after I die, so that they can't kill me, I will publish it posthumously. But
When we become a very open society.
inshallah,
And our state opens
absolutely.
up to good
yes,
things.
Yes, inshallah. So I like staying in my space and doing what I do well. The other thing that I think we need to mention is fantasy fiction.
Yes.
Fantasy fiction is something that I am very, because then I don't have to bother with being true to someone real. I can invent the best of things, you see. And I think that I was just thinking this yesterday when I was on the flight, not yesterday, day before yesterday. I was on the Karachi to the Heathrow to Dubai flight. I was reading a fantasy book, and you know, I sort of forgot about time. I never even looked at the television. I was just reading, and I said, you know, we need less books and less preoccupation with politics. We need, I think, to heal our brains through escape and magic. I think agar sach puchein to Pakistani, the Pakistani in me and the Pakistani in my mother, she needs to switch off Geo and she needs to pick up a fantasy book. And I think the healing that that storytelling will give her and all of us, I think, but we don't take it seriously enough. So my second book, Firefly in the Dark, is a fantasy book. And very few people pick it up because it doesn't tell us about the world. Yeah, but you escape the world.
Yes,
We are
I
obsessed
think so.
with
You are
realism.
learning about the world, but in a different way, not as if you're watching a news channel.
Chhod do thodi der.
And also, coming to jinns, I think the jinn genre is sort of has taken off. I mean, you had Boy of Earth and Fire by Sunny Shah.
Sunny
Yes,
Shah.
yes, yes.
And your book Firefly, and I think there's an Indian writer who's written something on
I think
jinns
there's an entire
recently.
anthology.
Yeah.
by
And
Mahesh
Usman,
Pawar.
I've forgotten his name. What's his last name? Does anyone?
Usman Malik.
Midnight Doorways. We have an
Usman
avid
Malik.
reader over there. She's
There we
probably
go.
Thank you.
yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
Usman Malik.
So I
yeah.
think
Malik.
that's a
Usman
very
Malik.
interesting genre because that's something totally localized to our culture.
लेकिन हम नहीं पढ़ते.
क्यों नहीं पढ़ते हैं?
आप लोग
It's so
बताइए.
interesting. Should we ask the audience to step in also
Yes,
and
yes.
have a more interactive session?
I would
Can
love
we
that.
have the mic? Can you give the mic to यहाँ पे? Yes, please, Mehveen, please go ahead.
I think because
Can you hear her?
No.
can I just keep it up? I think if we started publishing,
But you won't be recorded. Please use the mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mic और है? अच्छा. Anyway. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because you see in the West what they've done, especially with fantasy, is they've put it online. I know that's detrimental to book writers, but in a country where you're developing your literary landscape and few readers, I think it might be a good idea to begin with the online to get children reading. We, as educationists and as academics, and even people working in any field, realize that when there is a report on a table, nobody's reading it. They've read the first 2 lines and then they've forgotten about it because that's as much as the attention they want to give it to. Whereas if you take the phone, everybody's on it 24/7. So maybe there is a shift that needs to happen, at least to get people reading. I mean, books you can never forgo completely. I love holding a book and, rubbing my fingers. But how do you address this issue of the phone? Because people are still reading. And I know when I travel, I have an audio book or a e-book. So it might help our literature landscape. I think the publisher here should be able to answer that.
Yeah, I think because Maniza Naqvi is publishing online, so she can.
I mean, I think it's inevitable. Most people will be reading ebooks, and whether we like it or not, that is where we're going. That change has already taken place. You yourself are reading on your phone or on Kindle or a Kindle reader-like device, and that the point is not the way the device you read on, whether it's paper or your phone. The point is that people should be reading. We are becoming more and more as a global in the global society, which is becoming visual and is not reading, and I think that has an effect on the brain, which may not be positive. So that's my own opinion, but I think there's psychology and science behind that to show that we are indeed going towards a shorter and shorter attention span, and our ability to really be creative is being hindered by that as well.
So can I say something to that? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to give my opinion on this because I read fantasy books a lot,
Yeah.
Oh, good.
specifically
Great.
English fantasy.
Yeah.
But my issue when I pick up a fantasy book is that fantasy books are inherently politicized. All of them.
Can you give an example?
I'll give an example. Narnia, for example, is a very famous fantasy book, very, very old. It is completely based on the Bible and the stories in the Bible. So that is an inherently political story, and growing up as a Muslim girl, reading Narnia was very different for me, and I was not able to relate to it. In fact, a lot of the villains in Narnia behaved like me.
Yes.
So fantasy for me is
you were
closed off.
certainly not a fawn, were you?
So have you read any Pakistani fantasy?
I have not. I am
Well,
venturing into that.
this is the thing. This is what I was trying to
Yeah.
say. That we are writing, right? But actually, and I find this, and थोड़ी सी शिकायत भी है इसमें, I find that our readers are very quick to judge. You guys are not right. But we are writing, but you're not picking our book up. Sorry, एक second, and then, and the other thing also is that with Firefly in the Dark, I hoped, and I went to a lot of schools, because I was a teacher at that time, I was not living in London. And I said, do you think you could put this on a curriculum for class 8, whatever? No. The idea was that the books by British and American writers were more important than the books by Pakistani writers. I would be very happy if you say, no, your book is not up to standard or whatever, but that's not. I said, look, it's a problem. Everybody's reading Harry Potter, which is not a problem. I'm glad that they're reading, but what about we didn't know, my kids didn't know what sheesh nagans are. My characters did not know what jinns are and all the fable behind it. So I said, it'd be nice. No. So there is a distinct, when we talk about e-books and things like that, in the UK, the sales of physical books have far exceeded this year the sale of e-books.
That's
Yay,
what it is.
that's
Okay,
great.
That's
so
an
it's coming
encouraging
back.
sign,
It's
yeah.
So
coming
happy
back,
to hear
right?
that.
And actually, fantasy. अगर आप if you look at this Onyx Storm series, this whole
Rebecca Yarros.
yes, Rebecca Yarros. So it's fantasy. Okay, and it's racy and it's not considered serious literature, and I feel like we need to expand, we need to be less snobbish, I think.
Yeah, because reading is not only about reading classics or serious
So
literature.
it's our teachers and our parents who need to allow children. इन्होंने कुछ कहना था.
एक पीछे भी है, somebody raised, that one, and then you. Can we go right to the back first and then come to you? Thank you.
15 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. I was just wondering, do you have an ideal reader in your minds when you're writing?
So oddly enough, when we're writing, the focus is always on making a book very effective. How do I tell the story as effectively as I can? The ideal reader at first is ourselves. We're more interested in how it sounds to us, but I don't think it's possible to have an ideal reader. I wouldn't say I write for a particular generation or a particular person with a particular sensibility or particular political affiliation. I think that would be unfair. I write for the general reader, and oddly enough, it is the general reader that gravitates towards our books. Sometimes you get messages from people who you wouldn't assume would be interested in your work,
Yes.
and it's just completely out of the blue. So the ideal reader is.
Have you read any of our books? No. So then you can't answer the next question, which is, do you think we have an ideal reader? Does anybody think that we have an ideal reader?
No, I think it's better not to have an ideal
That's the
reader
thing, yeah.
and to have a broad spectrum of readers.
Because the minute you have an ideal reader, the minute that it's focused to someone, you can smell it. ये इनके लिए लिखा है, हमारे लिए नहीं लिखा है.
And you don't want to isolate any reader
Yeah.
from any.
But
people.
I do have ideal readers. Having blown it apart, because how it happened, you have an idea कि I want to write a book जो एक demographic पढ़ेगी, but I don't write it to them, But how it happened, I wanted to write to vent to all other girls who were going through the rishta process, the trolley rishta process.
Okay.
Okay. Firefly in the Dark was actually, I was constantly thinking about, I was not writing to, but thinking about my students while I was writing it. A Woman on a Suitcase, I wrote it specifically, I want it to be a source of comfort to those who have chosen the option of divorce. I wanted it to be a brave choice, not a shameful choice. So I do have readers in mind, but when you're writing, the first person you have to make sure you're not boring is yourself. So I think that's as close to what you can.
Eventually, every book has its own audience. Every book has its own destiny. I don't think you can write for one person every time. It's not like 7 books for Harry Potter, which.
But she did have an idea because all the other
Eventually,
books.
her audience
the growing
developed, right?
readers,
And she
yeah.
also. So one of the interesting things she did was she published a book a year or something.
Yeah.
So
So
eventually
they were growing up with her.
they were growing up with her. I don't think we can do that.
Would you like to ask your question? And then I have a couple of questions for the writers.
Your first question originally, like for Pakistanis getting into Pakistani authors. So first off, like what I believe in, like being part of the bubble as well, is that we get like growing up in my school, there was always Shakespeare, Henry V, all of these things like Etu, like
As You Like It.
You
yeah,
Constantly.
like it? Oh,
all
God.
and you know this complicated English language and English literature that we all believe would like push us forward into like Ivy League universities. So that's one big thing. Another big thing is like now it's 2025 and short form content has taken over everyone's phones. You look at the common man to the wealthy man. Everyone has Instagram reels. You're sending each other short form content, 5-second videos, 10-second videos. So that also disturbs your attention span.
Yep.
And honestly, I have like a younger cousin, he's 13 years old. He's on reels like 4 or 5 hours a day.
Yes.
I'm like, आज कौन सी किताब पढ़ी? He's like, किताब?
किताब क्या
क्या
चीज़ होती
scene है
है?
यार? कोई scene ही नहीं.
My own son, 18 years old.
Yeah.
I don't read. So I've given him a
Exactly.
copy of my book. It's on his bookshelf. I don't read. And he's very proud of it. But this is the thing. What parents are not realizing, actually, and there's a lot of study on this because actually we are the generation and the generation after us, they have done the tests and they have said that actually social media is an electronic drug. It's electronic cocaine.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that it's a drug when you're watching shorts.
So there is a movement to ban social media, in fact to ban smartphones for children under the age of 16. Yes.
Okay.
And I think that will help, but also by the way, we can always say कि देखें हम short form पढ़ सकते हैं तो हम short form लिखेंगे नहीं. Because you see, the thing is that there's a value in writing a story that it benefits me alone to write the story, okay? But reading a long form is an act of meditation, and it is an act of creativity, and it takes you away from the addiction. That it is an addiction. Smartphones are an addiction. And actually, I'm talking about it very passionately because I have an 8-year-old daughter, 18-year-old son, who I didn't raise. I inherited him with my husband, so he's my stepson. But he had already been given the phone when he was 10. And I feel like we're constantly struggling with him. So, jahan tak reading, that if he would put his phone down, and if he would read a book, he would benefit from that. Have I at all been relevant to what you're trying to say?
You have been very relevant. I did have one thing left to say.
Yeah, sorry.
I hope I'm not interjecting.
Bole.
Please go
The
ahead.
only thing I have left to say is that in a country like ours, propaganda goes deep into everything in daily life, especially whether it be Geo News, ya to Instagram Reels, ya to kuch bhi. There is some sort of, and social media was also invented as a propaganda tool. Let's put our tinfoil hats on for a second. You have the innovation of social media, and you have Meta, you have Facebook. They're all pushing something on to you. There's always some sort of propaganda going on.
Absolutely.
So to combat that machine, it's like, man, that's a tough fight. But honestly, props to you guys for, speaking your mind here today. So that's all I had to say.
Thank you.
I think there is an inverse relationship between righteous indignation and critical thinking, because we're so given to making judgments.
Farheen has something to
Hello.
say, and then Shazaf.
Yes, so hello, and it's so good to see you, Shazaf, here back in your hometown.
Thank you.
So there are two things I'll comment before I ask you a question for both of you. The first thing about the ideal reader, when Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, he thought that the ideal reader would be all of the Bloomsbury group and all of these people, the elite writers and readers. And it was the hippie crowd who smoked up and smoked high who got hold of Lord of the Rings in
That's
the
right.
60s. And they loved it. They loved it, and Tolkien was shocked. He's like, who are these people who are smoking up and they're reading my book? And that is what made Lord of the Rings reach the heights it did, because they created an audience for it whom Tolkien had never thought of.
Yes.
Secondly, the thing about the reels and everything, I don't know, Dr. Saad is here, he might agree with me. If you read more, you might not get dementia.
Yes.
So read more fiction.
Yes, absolutely.
Because you have to keep track of the characters and what are they doing and their timelines. So you might keep your mind active, because otherwise I think everybody's going to end up losing their mind. What I wanted to ask you about the publishing scene in Pakistan.
Yeah.
You see, you talked about new publishing houses coming in. But if you look at and it's great because now your books are available at a very low cost.
Yes.
If they're published abroad, they would be very expensive.
Yes.
The issue that I have with these local publishers is, and I know that it's not easy to get in, are these smaller bookshops that they're not in. तो अब लिबर्टी की कितनी आउटलेट्स हैं कराची में 6 होंगी 7 होंगी 8 होंगी 10 होंगी लेकिन जो छोटे छोटे स्टेशनरी स्टोर्स हैं ना which are like in
वो नहीं
खड़ा
stock
मार्केट
कर
there are
रहे।
6 उन पे आपकी किताब नहीं है
Right.
ठीक है नाज़माबाद में गुलिस्तान जौहर
नहीं
गुलशन
है।
इकबाल
नहीं
जो
है।
वहाँ स्टेशनरी स्टोर्स हैं where people go where they buy their risalas and their newspapers and their Urdu literature Urdu books वहाँ नहीं होगी. So that is the crowd that, because your stories are stories of domestic life which people will like to see. जब ड्रामे देखते हैं इतने शौक से तो your
लेकिन
stories are also, and they should be adapted into dramas by the way.
अभी हुई हैं.
But
शुरुआत अभी हुई है.
I'll just come to you, but I just want to say, leading on from your point, what about translation in Urdu?
कोई करे? Who's up for it? I can't
Yeah.
translate
We're
it
open
into
to offers.
But do you think things that pass in English writing from Pakistani authors? Because I know that a case of mangoes eaten in English is much more digestible than when it's eaten in Urdu.
A translation. Musharraf Ali Faruqi wrote this book called Between Clay and Dust, जिसकी एक बहुत ही खूबसूरत translation अफजाल अहमद सैयद ने की है. And he's changed it. It's a form of poetry, and I think it's brilliant. I don't know about sales. I don't know about money. You see, at
Speaking
the
of
end of
small
it,
bookshops, I feel sometimes a translated book may sell better there. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, can we come to the gentleman here? Can the mic come in front? Oh, you have it.
So, first of all, thank you everybody. Thank you for your discourse. Thank you for being here today. A comment and then a question. So the comment is that in my particular line of work, we deal with a lot of people from the global north, if you will. So whenever you write a manuscript, whenever you complete a book, the dare testament of you having written your name, your actual name as a foreword, written by, etc., that in and of itself speaks volumes about what the reader is going to be partaking in right now. For example, someone very starkly said to me once, you know, when we talk about the Pakistani landscape, it's not a tall order. We're only looking for two things, because those are two things which you all do so wonderfully well. And I said, what's that? And they said, the morbidly stark and the violently aspirational. That's it. The rest, when we talk about aspirational content, when we talk about the human experience, they're like, there are better writers, there are better people in the world.
Who said this?
they'll remain nameless
Okay.
for the purposes of being recorded. So I understand that there's a bit of a dichotomy between the global north and the south. When you talk about readership, this is the question. I, for example, read a fair bit. It was an African writer named Noor Naga earlier in the year. She wrote something as simple as this is an American student who comes to Africa for the first time, and she was walking in the marketplace, and she said beggars were poking me with their stumps as if asking me to compensate them for the amputation I had no part of.
Yeah.
So that hit me because I know what that's about.
Yeah.
I know I've lived it, but I instantly connected that my Caucasian counterpart will never be able to even will never be able to consider it. My question then becomes, when you choose to write in English, which is again a kind of a precursor to this entire session, how much of it is a remnant of yours to the human, like your contribution to the human condition, and how much of it is actually a work of translation that you're trying to actually humanize yourself for the general readership, which in itself is because you're writing in English.
Can I go first?
Go first.
You said that I got it, but my Caucasian counterpart wouldn't. Why? What makes you think they wouldn't? This is what I
tend to agree with Shazaf that people get a lot more than is in their range of experience. That's what literature is there for.
So my thing is that I think they would get it. They might not get it with the same immediacy and depth as why you would get, but they'd get it, and them getting it is enough. I think.
Taha?
I think just generally human experiences are, they're open to interpretation, so naturally your friend would understand it. As Shazaf said, that there is a certain immediacy to what your experience is, but people choose not to look into something or talk about it openly, but basic human emotions we understand. We understand oppression and what it does to us. We understand how people have been shortchanged. So that's what it is. And when you mentioned something about how much the act of English requires us to translate, what was your question again?
That essentially, when you choose to write in English, obviously you're making a conscionable choice. But while doing so, you are automatically excluding yourself from that experience because, as for example, when we talk about the Pakistani sort of mentality, the mindset, I understand and I really appreciate that you said there are certain things which you don't like to write about because you would be doing them a disservice because you haven't been part of that. So the same thing sort of applies where because you're writing in English to begin with, you're sort of automatically it's a work of translation as opposed to, go on.
So we are out of time. So Mehveen,
Sorry.
if it's a very quick one, and yeah.
I just want to know from both our writers, how come we see a lot of individual books, but there is no sort of a fairy tale like.
Okay, and there's one more question. Is that a quick question? Can you ask that so they can answer together because we are out of time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you ask also? So rapid fire round.
Rapid fire.
Yeah.
Quick
The
question.
authors who write in foreign lands, diaspora Pakistani, do they have any support here?
Not much.
Not much at all, no.
Not much.
Not much.
बहुत जल्दी 2 seconds. There was a writer who put it on Facebook. He writes, Awais Khan, he put it on Facebook that I'm appealing to the Pakistani readers to please buy our books. And you could not, and I shared his post. And the kind of backlash I received for sharing that post, who do you think you are that we should buy your books? I feel like there is an internal sort of shame, hatred, not taking ourselves as seriously, and that is very limited, unfortunately, to Pakistan. Again, not too many people here, so I can say it, but I think Indian writers have a sense of unity, pride. Bangladeshi, there's a community, but Pakistanis, I find...
And it's tied with this...
Yes, you're
but
right.
I'm going to talk about writers, theek hai na? But and actually, I feel that although we are benefiting from the works of our forebearers again very controversial, have not supported us as much as, you know, there is a struggle of individuals
Okay.
as opposed to a
Yeah.
collective.
Taha,
Very
2
quick-
seconds.
Okay, so I've lost my train of thought, but it's also linked to the idea that we're writing about certain very uncomfortable issues, which is why people don't want to gravitate towards our writing. If we wrote almost something like propaganda,
Popular, yeah.
something that
Okay.
promotes Pakistan in a positive light, maybe that would be very different. But
So
yeah.
I'm so sorry we've run out of time. I want to thank our two lively authors, Shazaf, Fatima, Heather, and Taha Kehar. And
thank-
also thank you to a wonderful audience.
Yes, the
Thank you.
audience and
Thank
also
you
to our
very much.
moderator. Thank you so much.
Lovely
Thank you.
moderator.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Anyone?
Din